Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Matt Scott. For today's guest, we have Sean Holman. Sean has been around the off-road and overland community for decades. In fact, he's just recently celebrated almost 20 years with publications like Fourwheeler, Off-Road, and others. Sean has driven Jeeps and Toyotas and everything in between. In fact, recently he just completed a significant trip using Rivian R1Ts to go across the Trans-America Trail. We get into the details on how Sean builds his vehicles, some basic insights onto four-wheel drive travel. He also gives some really thoughtful insights on some new trails that are available in Southern California that take days and days to cross for the overland traveler. This is a really great conversation. Sean is an awesome guy, great talent, so special for us to have him on the podcast today. So please enjoy our wide-ranging conversation with Sean Holman. This content is brought to you by Overland Journal, our premium quality print publication. The magazine was founded in 2006 with the goal of providing independent equipment and vehicle reviews, along with the most stunning adventures and photography. We care deeply about the countries and cultures we visit and share our experiences freely with our readers. We also have zero advertorial policy and do not accept any advertiser compensation for our reviews. By subscribing to Overland Journal, you're helping to support our employee-owned and veteran-owned publication. Your support also provides resources and funding for content like you are watching or listening to right now. You can subscribe directly on our website at overlandjournal.com. So Sean Holman, thank you so much for being on the podcast, man.
I had to bring you a trailer, so I figured kill two birds with one stone, right?
Well, we've been talking about having you come out here for at least 4 or 5 years.
It's been
It's been some time.
Well, and then I get grief from these guys over here because they're like, you were in Prescott, you were at Center Force and you didn't come by, or you were at so and so didn't come by.
We can always take you out for beers.
So now the Center Force guys are gonna be mad that I saw you and not them. So I'm cheating on them this time. So
You know what? I love that. I love that. Tell me more about that.
Is it Prescott or Prescott? Because that's always the big thing. Nobody knows how to pronounce it.
Okay, so I do have a story about this.
Okay.
I have a story about this. I was at you've been to Crown King.
I have.
The back
Yep.
road to Crown
Yes.
King. It's a great four-wheel drive road.
Yep.
And you get there, and there's this cool old hotel and a bar and
Yep.
everything like that. And I pulled up to the bar, and I ordered a Prescott ale. And this old guy looks over at me, and he's like, it's called Prescott ale. And I said, well, my name's Scott.
Yeah.
And until
Exactly.
people start calling me Skit, I'm gonna call. And he's like, fair enough.
All right. Well, you know what? I got no argument for that.
So I actually
He
don't
probably moved from California like last week, like everybody else.
Exactly.
So today we've had a bunch of storms come through. It's been super wet out here, just in the Southwest, right? So I left home this morning. Beautiful day.
Yeah.
Right. Yesterday was about 65 degrees and sunny. I'm crossing the desert. Massive sandstorm, 30, 40 mile an hour winds. I get up in the mountains on my way here, snow everywhere. I'm like, I think I've seen everything today.
Yeah, you got the whole spectrum.
There's a bunch of snow in Prescott right now.
There's a ton.
Especially like a little higher up in elevation. Like my brother-in-law has like 2 feet.
That's a lot of snow.
And I have we have like inches.
Yeah. That's the nice thing about Prescott weather, though. It's just kind of
You get a taste of everything, but there's never anything too extreme.
You get all 4 seasons,
Yeah.
and I think that's why a lot of Californians end up here.
Yeah.
I mean, so speaking of California, I believe that's where you were born, right?
Yep. Born and raised, and everybody keeps asking me when I'm going to leave, and I'm going to be the last guy to turn the lights off and hold the carpet down. So, listen, I had this conversation with my wife, and she said, if we ever went somewhere, where would we go? I'm like, well, I'm going to go somewhere that's a really red state. So I'm like, what's the most red? Oh, Wyoming. And she goes, oh, it snows there, right? I'm like, yeah. She goes, man, I don't want to go anywhere where there's snow. Oh, okay. All right. Look at the map again. I'm like, Tennessee, that everybody's going to Tennessee. That'd be pretty nice. She goes, don't they have like freezing rain there? Yeah. She goes, and big bugs. I'm like, oh yeah, ticks fall out of the tree. Last time I was there, I'm like, what? That's not fair. Like, how are they? They're paratrooping. All right, so that's not going to happen. So I'm like, the Gulf Coast. Gulf Coast would be amazing. She goes, humidity. There's a lot of humidity there, right? I'm like, all right. Desert Southwest. Do we go Nevada? Do we, get a little ranch up there? Go to Arizona? She goes, I can't do anything over 100. I'm like, well, what exactly do you want? She goes, well, I want it to be about 70 year round. I go, we live there. We're 2 miles from the beach. Like, we're not leaving. There's no, the taxes suck. Everything sucks. But I bought my house the current house in 2008. And so I've been there this year will be 6 years. 2018. So this year will be 6 years, I guess. And it's gone up 66% in value.
Yeah.
In that time.
That's almost Prescott in the last year.
I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely, so like, why would I ever leave? Like, I'm in real estate. I did really well in my first house. I have a really nice house that there's no reason to go. Taxes are high. Yeah, all that stuff. The politics suck. All that stuff. But if you don't turn on the TV, and you fire
just
up,
go to the beach,
and you just go to the beach, and you have a cigar on the porch or some whiskey, and you turn on your gas stove with reckless abandon, you don't really care about the rest of it.
What's the gas?
I don't know what the deal is, but somebody decided that gas stoves were now persona.
Yeah, we've only been using for 120 years.
It's another thing that.
Here's my thing. Leave my stove alone. Like, I purposely took out an electric stove, ran a gas line so that I could cook over fire.
Yeah.
Like, I did that on purpose. Yeah. Now you're messing with that, and it bothers me. So.
It's like so elemental
and how long
to human.
Are you using it even?
Yeah.
Like.
Well, the thing is, like, so I live in this neighborhood that we had a Boeing plant that's now being parceled out for like Amazon warehousing and stuff like that. But this Boeing plant supported Saturn V and all these great moonshot programs and all the stuff back in the 60s. It was part of the shuttle program in the 90s and 2000s. And so when they built the plant back in the mid 60s, all the houses were like, this is the future. So all the houses were all electric. So it was electric stoves and electric furnaces. And then the only thing that was gas were the water heaters. And so my house, I'm like, all right, I got a gas line here, but I want to get rid of this electric stuff. So took out the water heater because it was in an upstairs closet, which like I had nightmares of the thing letting go and ruining the whole house. Did a tankless on the outside, and then that gas line that fed it, I was having my whole house repiped because it was galvanized pipe, 50 years old, horrible idea. So I'm like, hey, you guys repipe or do you guys do gas? Yeah, what do you need? I'm like, can you run it through the ceiling to my kitchen? Because I'm having my kitchen remodeled in a few months. So they just dropped it in. And I'm like, yep, got my gas. So anyway, that's why I get triggered, because I'm like, I put effort into making sure I have my gas stove.
It is supposedly nicer to cook over.
It is.
I think so.
I don't know how to cook.
Oh, well.
We can ask Laura. She'll know the answer to that question.
She likes to cook, but I burn water. I put water on the stove.
That's why he's so skinny.
It never he goes away.
I got my beer belly.
Yeah, you don't have to cook beer, so
yeah, it's funny.
And you get all the calories.
People do talk smack about California, particularly here, but it is,
of course,
it is the most beautiful state.
It's really gorgeous.
I mean, Utah's beautiful, but it's kind of beautiful in a singular way.
Exactly.
Like it's the stark kind of red rocks and whatever. California just has it all.
We literally have, where I live in Orange County, I live in Huntington Beach, you could surf in the morning and snowboard in the afternoon. Yeah. People don't realize how close the mountains are to, Southern California proper.
Tallest mountain in the lower 48, which is right next to the lowest place.
Right.
I mean.
Yeah, Badwater in Death Valley. We've got forests. We've got desert.
Huge forests.
Massive. The Mojave Desert and the Sonoran Desert coming together.
Huge.
Unbelievable.
Huge. And
this is what a lot of people don't realize. I've got a lot of friends who've moved out of state. And one of my friends is like, I'm thinking about moving to Tennessee. And I said, okay, that's great, but you like off-roading? He's like, yeah. Because there's no off-roading. He goes, what? I said, we are so lucky because out in the West, California especially, you guys have a lot of Indian reservations that you have to navigate from in Arizona. California doesn't really have that. We just have a ton of BLM land. And so the further east you go, obviously you get to Texas, Montana, all that. It's all private. It's all private. It's ranches. Yeah. Everything east of the Mississippi is private off-road parks for the most part. Yep. So the ability to go out, we have the East Mojave Heritage Trail, which is 733 miles long. And it is one of the most incredible, it may be, you could fight me on this. I'll go on record saying it's the best overlanding trail in the United States. It's that epic.
Let's talk
you
about
guys heard
it. You're
Yeah.
enthusiastic.
Yeah, I want to
Tell me
Tell me
more.
some more stories.
All right,
about
so most of the people who have traveled to California, like if you go to Utah, you go to Moab or you go to San Hollow, right? Like those are the places you go. San Rafael as well. A lot of people from out of state, they want to do the Mojave Road. So the Mojave Road is the original wagon road into California. So that road was used by the Spanish missionaries, used by the natives. They traded with the coast. It's 138 miles long from the Colorado River into Barstow. And it was started by a gentleman by the name of Dennis Casebeer, who passed away a few years ago. And it's overseen by the Mojave Desert Heritage and Cultural Association.
Which you're involved with.
So I'm on the board of directors.
Yeah.
So to make a really long story slightly less long, when he developed the Mojave Road, there's a mailbox that you sign in. So everybody always takes a picture of the flag in the mailbox. The reason that mailbox exists is so that there's a record for the BLM about traffic on the road. So once the road started getting popular, they're like, hey, Dennis, can you go out and map out this new trail to take some pressure off the Mojave Road? So Dennis spent years mapping out the East Mojave Heritage Trail. And we call it the EMHT, has 4 guidebooks for 4 segments, and it will take about 10 days to do it right. Maybe 2 weeks.
Wow.
You can't bonsai through it.
I knew nothing about this.
Yeah, I didn't either. Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he basically creates this trail, and then and publishes the books, and it's only alive for a little while before 1994, Bill Clinton signs the Desert Protection Act and puts wilderness areas all over this trail. So Dennis felt betrayed by the BLM because he had so much money into it. He had the books into it. They asked him to do it.
Yeah.
And then they go and close all the land. So it basically died until 2019 when Billy Creech, who's now the president of MDHCA,
Yep. He's done some
wrote a
content
story
for
for
us,
Expedition Portal on EMHT. But with Dennis's blessing, he said, can I do a retrace of it and I'll route everything and make it compliant and legal? And Dennis gave him his blessing, and it went from 630 miles or something to 733 because of all the go-arounds. It is epic on if you are an overlander and you want to have that experience of being away from everybody and you don't want to do international.
Yeah.
There are very few places where you can go. Maybe the BDR or maybe parts of the Transamerica Trail that I did with Rivian this past summer, maybe the Pony Express, some of those maybe. But the amount of desolation and history that this takes you through, whether it's petroglyphs, whether it's the first African-American homesteaders, whether it's, the silver and gold rush of that era, whether it's the old, Tidewater and Tonopah Railroad, and you see everything. You're in high elevation with Joshua trees around the SEMA Dome. You are in, low elevation in the, the Mojave Sink down on the southern end of it. It spans everything, sand, rock. I mean, just the entire trail is just stunningly beautiful and remote for almost the entire length of it.
And is it something that you need? Like, can you do it with a full size truck, or
So
you just got to have some clearance, maybe?
I would say rear locker minimum, 33s, 35s, and you want to have a little bit of suspension lift because there's a lot of washouts. There's times where you're driving, so a lot of World War II history out there. And on top of the old railroad berms, they took the rails during World War II, but the berms still exist, and you're in and off these berms because of erosion and things like that. You're finding desert springs. There's places where there were cowboy and Indian fights. There were, it's so varied and there's so much history. The only place that you can get all that history is from the books from the MDHCA website. So mdhca.org, and then you can book 1, 2, 3, and 4. It starts in Needles, ends in Needles. It's a massive loop, but it starts in Needles, goes over State Line up to Searchlight, goes across the 15, kind of where that solar farm is. In fact, that solar farm that's just outside of the Vegas, right there on State Line. The original trace of the road cuts through their property, so you have to go along the fence line. You go down the backside of Baker on your way to Death Valley, Coliseum Mine. You come down, was it 127 down into Baker? You go the backside of Baker. You cross over to Cocoa Reef, and there's a giant mining project out there. Vast vistas of the SEMA Dome, and you go south from there down to the Mojave Road where 17 Mile Point is and the cinder cones are and the lava flows. From there, you go down Rocky Ridge into the Sink. and then you're way south, and you end up on there. Matter of fact, the old wagon road that was like Laughlin to Prescott or something like that. So that's part of the EMHT as well. So it's just, if you've ever wanted to do domestic travel and you want the penultimate trail where you have to be on your game and be self-sufficient and reliable, that's the trail to do.
Awesome.
Stunning.
I want to do it.
You heard it here from Sean.
Is it earth roamable with a good driver?
As long as you don't mind knocking over bushes and things like that. I mean,
As long as they're not endangered bushes.
I would say the Earth Roamer is probably too big for some sections of it. Okay. But I think if you had something like a really well-built Prospector XL, that would probably be like the limit of something. Okay. A really nice Forerunner with suspension on 33s, a Wrangler on 35s, things like that. I mean, you don't have to be overly built. You will need low range. There are going to be times where you need, recovery boards, things like that, or potentially your winch. You should probably always go with a couple of people or have a satellite communicator because you are way remote.
That sounds remote.
Yeah, I was at
that people really don't go.
I was in a section between I think it was the Old Woman Mountains and the Turtle Mountain Wilderness area, and it was getting dark, and I had left my guys. I wanted to finish the trail, and they had to leave. I had an extra day, so I'm like, I'm going to keep going because I'm good, and I'm pretty self-sufficient. And I got to this wilderness area, and so basically on one side of the road is one wilderness boundary, the other side of the road is the other wilderness boundary, and you basically have 40 feet of center line on the road, and that's it. And there's a little turnout, and it was getting dark, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna pull over here, set up a little bit of camp. Was on the side of the road, and I looked around. There wasn't a headlight, a flashlight, a tail light. There wasn't a fire. I mean, it was pitch black, no moon that night.
That's cool.
So
That's
I
hard to find.
Made a little fire, sat there, and just kind of was looking at the stars. And then I start hearing military aircraft overhead, and it sounds like a C-130 and probably a KC-135. Looked at my phone. That's what they are. Except the C-130 was doing orbits around me for about 2 hours on the pilot's side. So I got a friend who does maintenance out of Yuma, and I'm like, hey, just curious, these C-130s come out there? I saw, my radar app only showed some of it, but there were more planes. He goes, was he orbiting you on the pilot's side? I said, yeah. He goes, yeah, that was a AC-130. So that was like a Puff the Magic Dragon or Spooky. Basically, saw my little fire in the middle of the desert and went, oh, there's our target for the night. Basically orbited me, and I'm sure I died several times over. But it was really cool because it was so dark. The only light out there was the Vegas on the horizon.
Yeah,
you could see that, and maybe LA on the other side.
So 4 books, and have you done it all at once, or
I've done
something that people could kind of
so I've done 2 chunks. So I did I did 1 and 2, and then I did 3 and 4.
Cool.
Yeah, and it was each one was I think 6 or 7 days.
I mean, I think I kind of know the areas you're talking about. We've been back there a lot on like Rebel Rally and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's remote, and it's
and there's stark. There's 4 mailboxes, so you want to sign in for each segment. We're also working on a passport program where you can stamp your passport and then be a part of a special club for people who have done all of the MDHCA trails, so Mojave Road as well as EMHT. And a lot of people don't realize that Goffs, California, which is just north of the 40, west of Needles, people don't realize that there's actually a 5th mailbox there. I guess it would be a 6th mailbox. And so you can check in there, and it's like the mystery box. People are like, oh, I got all 5 of them. You're like, well, there's still 1 more. They're like, what? And there's 1 at Goff. So it's pretty cool that. And Goff's is a cool place if you ever want to check that out.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole area is just amazing.
Yeah, we have one of the only working stamp mills, 10 stamp mills in North America. When that sucker's going, man, it's so awesome.
Yeah, I remember the first time I did Mojave Road had to have been like 2004, 2005. And I drove for hours without seeing any tire tracks.
Yeah.
Now it was a well-established trail, but there was no tracks, and now
it's so busy now.
It's so busy that I don't go back.
Everybody with the RAV4 Adventure with like a puck lift and like 28-inch tires is like, oh, I can totally do it.
Yeah,
and you can. Subaru, and you can. There's but the problem is a lot of those people who are out there aren't equipped.
Yeah.
If it goes sideways,
but
like the vehicle can do it, but you don't have a strap, and you don't have enough water, and you don't have a blanket, and all that kind of stuff.
But let's talk about that. I mean, I think that something that the media could do a better job on this space is, to stop fixating on just a couple of trails. And it's so cool to be able to highlight this new project. I mean, That's
I mean, there's so many places to go. There's a third trail that Dennis mapped out that's been closed for a long time. Hoping Billy gets around to getting it reopened. We're working with the BLM. We have an MOU with the Needles Field Office. We're working on an MOU with the National Park Service for the Mojave National Preserve, which the majority of the Mojave Road goes through, to be the stewards of all that.
yeah.
There's so much tourist dollars that come in
yeah.
from that.
Yeah.
I mean, people that are, if you go out for a day trip or for a couple hours, you spend X amount of money. But if you go travel like you did for 7 days or 10 days, I mean, that's a lot of money for the local economy.
Yeah.
Couple gas stops,
grocery
food,
stores.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, and I think with what you're saying initially is it takes that strain off of just one particular place.
Well, that's the problem with land closure. Closing, in my opinion, land closure is not helping the land, because you're starting to squeeze people into smaller and smaller areas, and so you're actually it's a detriment to those areas. Now because of that, they want to close those areas down, and you squeeze people more, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can teach responsible recreation, stay on the trails, and be able to, I was a big proponent of cherry stem roads and existing trails remaining open. You can't create new ones. You can't go over there unless you walk. I'm fine with all that.
Well, in a lot of places, there's no need to create new trails.
Absolutely.
I mean, in Arizona, there's so many.
Yeah, open up Onyx and you can see just, there's trails that you probably have been on or came across. Where's that one go? And like to have some sort of
in Arizona,
map software
the
that
Onyx
shows that.
map is just like a large chunk of fluorescent green.
Yeah, totally. It looks like a yarn ball or something like that.
And it's confusing.
That my cat's been playing with.
Well, and then once they close the trails, then people still go out there and recreate.
Yeah.
They just do it illegally.
Yeah.
And because they're pissed off that it's closed, then they knock over the signs and you see them driving all over the place. Yeah.
That's why we can't have nice things, right? It's a small group of people. But on our podcast, we've done the whole try to do the education part of it. If you want to go out and explore in your truck, that's great. But it's not excessive to have a week's supply of water or extra clothes or blankets or food and people joke with overlanders that we're overloaders, but there's a reason for that.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure,
honestly, is if you're going for more than a couple days, you have a pretty good amount of gear. I think somebody was asking me what I thought the next big thing in overlanding was, and I think it's lightweighting. I think people got to a point where they realized how heavy they got and how poor the suspension performance.
5,000%.
Yeah, and now people are figuring out, what do I take that I've never used, or what can I take, or what materials can I use for my boxes or my drawers or whatever that are going to be lighter than what I did before, so I can get claw back some of that payload and ground clearance.
Yeah, I mean...
Well, and just take some pressure off of these lightweight vehicles. I mean, a Tacoma is a lightweight vehicle.
I mean, was it 900, 50 pounds, something like that, of payload, and so you put two people in it, two good-sized dudes that are 200 pounds, and
my wagon has more payload than that.
I know, it's crazy.
Station
it's
wagon.
crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, on that, the lightweight stuff. Does it almost seem to you guys that these trucks that are overbuilt, they just kind of look a little tacky? They're trying too hard now. I'm not trying to be a fashionista of overlanding, but
I think that's what it is, though. It's fashion.
It is fashion. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have. Not everything needs to be mil-spec anodized.
Yeah.
But now, get your anodized in all sorts of colors and things like that. Cool, adds a pop of color. Yeah. Some stuff does need to be mil-spec because you're relying on it. You don't want it to corrode on your vehicle. But the vast majority of people are just doing it for the vanity of it or for the look. I mean, think of how many people their soft cover for the rooftop tent got UV roached before their tent got their first use, right?
Yeah.
Just from driving around. And I had a 20 JL with my Go Fast on it, which I absolutely loved. And I tried not to hang anything off the back other than that. And then now I've got a 392, and I'm getting away from the rooftop.
Talk about the 392.
392 is awesome.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
We had fun with the one that we had.
You guys have seen the video, the photo of me in the blue one on two wheels?
Was that was when they first came out, when you had the pre-production one?
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, they're insane.
Yeah, it's a stupid amount of fun.
Yeah.
And they sound good.
And the 392 is the perfect transition from what we're talking about. You had the 2020 JL, and I know that you did a supercharger on yours. I did a supercharger on mine. I don't think either of us were happy. I ended up taking mine off because the Magnuson one was. so bad.
I thought the quality.
It cost me more to take it off than it did to put it back on.
The quality of the kit I had was good.
Yeah,
but
you have the Edelbrock kit, and they know what they're doing. I'm not saying Magnuson doesn't.
But I had the California compliant version, which I think really kind of neutered it.
Yeah,
and so I was down on horsepower.
Manual,
and I had a manual,
which was, I think, the big deal.
Which I loved having a manual. In fact, it pained me when I got the 392 it's the first new vehicle I've ever bought that was automatic.
Interesting. That's going to be hard to do going forward.
When you said Sean was coming in, I'm like, oh, yes, well, he won't be here to visit Centerforce anymore. He doesn't have a manual. He's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's if you think about it, like, why does everybody love the GX platform? It's because it's a Forerunner with a V8, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you kind of the same thing with the JL. The 392 is something that only AEV did in the aftermarket before, or Burnsville, or America's Most Wanted, or whatever. But full warranty, 470 horsepower, 470 pound-feet of torque, all-wheel drive transfer case.
Isn't it 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds?
4.5 seconds.
That's insane.
Yeah, the quarter mile is like, I want to say it's like 12.5 at like 102 or something. And it's funny because it's got the exhaust button.
I love that though.
So you pull up, and you'll see like some douchey kid in like his stanced import, and he's like, blah, 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 and you're like, brr, 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 brr. He starts looking around. And he's like, "What's making that noise?" Right? And and then it's all-wheel drive. So then you just leap on the dude, and like one kid tried to catch up with me, and he looked, and I'm lifted. I've got an AEV JL370, so I'm up fairly tall, and I'm looking at the passenger seat, or through the passenger seat or the passenger window, and I'm looking at him, and I could just see this much of his head, and he's looking up like, what happened to me? Like when he caught up. Although I will say there was a totally done up, super stealthy clean Volkswagen Golf. And he ran me, and at the next light, I just nodded. I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm done picking on little cars. He just smiled. And it's like, all right, I got it. But yeah, it's incredible. And then people don't know this, but there's a de facto sport mode on the 392, which makes it even more rowdy. So the Off-Road Plus button, if you hit Off-Road Plus, it changes the shift points, it changes the timing, it makes the exhaust crackle and pop on decel, and it tightens up the shifts. And it automatically turns off traction control, which you want to turn back on the street, because it's just stupid.
And you can run that in they're all-wheel drive.
Yeah, but I have a Taser, so I can run in two-wheel drive if I want to, which is kind of nice. But it's just a stupid amount of power. It sounds great, and the fuel economy is actually on the highways okay. Like I'm on 37s with the factory 456s, because when I started out as an XR, and I get about 16 on the highway. I get
not that bad.
10, 11 around town. That sucks. But but on the highway, I mean, that, from a 20-gallon tank, that's good. It's better than what my supercharger got. So the supercharged Jeep was about a mile per gallon better in the city and about 2 miles per gallon worse on the highway. So for going to Utah and all the trips, like I can go 300 miles on a tank, which I was around 250, 240 with the supercharger, which just kills everything. Like not being able to go 280, 300 becomes a problem, especially out in the West where you're trying to make time and get places.
Yeah, because then it kind of times with, I got to go to the bathroom, I got to get some food, got to get, whatever.
Yeah.
Can we just take a moment to reflect on the fact that this vehicle exists and how awesome that is?
Thank you, Jeep.
So the reason it exists in that and not the Gladiator, I'm sure, because everybody's like, when's it coming to the Gladiator?
Oh, yeah,
I'm like, it's not.
This is a good story.
So Tim Kaniskis, who ran Dodge, who was Hellcat everything guy, as a pet project, came to Jeep. He was only at Jeep for about a year, and the code name was J9. And so they put the Hemi, and they went, well, why just do the regular Hemi? Let's put an SRT Hemi in there. And so that's how it became the deal. Well, when he went back to Dodge, and Jim Morrison, who was originally at Jeep in marketing and all that, went to Ram, was running Ram, and then came back to Jeep to run Jeep and replace Kaniskis. That's when the Stellantis stuff kind of happened, and the focus on EVs and 4xe became more than 392. So it was never ported over to the Gladiator. And so, sorry, Gladiator guys. And I also think, as much as I love the Gladiator, I just feel like the JL rear suspension is so much. It just feels like a next generation in terms of ride quality and everything, where there's holes in the factory setup on the Gladiator. Just doesn't feel as refined or
it's pretty busy, actually. More busy than the wheelbase should allow it to be.
Agreed.
I think the Gladiator is a fantastic vehicle,
but it's not a good Jeep and it's not a good truck.
That's
right.
Interesting.
It does everything, but I parked mine. This is before I went to my Prospector XL
Yeah.
because I parked mine at the dealer for service next to a 2500, and I realized it's maybe 6 inches shorter.
Yeah.
And it's just as wide.
So people wonder why they're so long, and that's because on the Jeep, you have to have the front axle so far forward to clear the oil pan so you can get that articulation. So because you're locked into that front bumper to A-pillar length anyway because of where it is, where if you look at a Ranger or Tacoma, that front axle is closer to the firewall.
Yeah, the
And
engine's like sitting underneath your dash.
So the Jeep is already at a disadvantage because of the architecture of the front, and then they still wanted to have a 5-foot bed in it, and so it is the size that it is, which is why it's almost the same size as AEV Brute because they same issue, right? They're really close in
and
size.
people criticize the Gladiator for that, but I think the way you said it is just, I mean, if you had anything less than a 5-foot bed,
you wouldn't be happy.
You have a Subaru Baja at that point.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's the Gladiator is a great vehicle, especially after you take it to the aftermarket. Like I know the AEV kit does wonders for the rear suspension, but stock, they're like you said, they're busy, especially on a non-Rubicon.
Yeah.
Like I know it uses a lot of Ram DS parts or DT parts on the back, which is good and bad. You know, it's good because it's familiar parts bin stuff, but it's bad because it's not its own suspension, right? So there's some compromise in there.
Yeah. I mean, the rear suspension, I had never necessarily thought of it as a fault, but that is where I struggled with mine, putting the camper on it. I had unfortunately sold mine before AV did the high capacity springs, which I think
would have made all the difference on yours.
Really would have made a lot of difference, but I don't know. Really, really cool car though. Glad it exists. Cool that you can have a pickup truck that you can take the doors off. And yada yada yada.
I'm just happy I can park my 392 in the garage and not leave it in the driveway anymore.
That's the thing that I think is so cool about the 392 JL is, I mean, you live in a pretty urban area or suburban or whatever, but the Wrangler is a great city car.
Oh,
you
yeah.
can park
So
it
maneuverable.
anywhere, and if there's a curb there,
You
who
don't care.
cares?
Yeah.
Like you're up high, but
good visibility.
And you don't ever feel guilty about driving it. Like I remember back in Four-Wheeler of the Year, back in 2005, and I remember there's one year we had a Hummer H3, and we had I don't know, whatever the rest of the SUVs were. I guess it doesn't really matter for storytelling purposes. But when you get in the H3, you just didn't care about it. Just you weren't worried about it. You just drove it. And the Jeep's the same way. Like you can get in and just drive it. You take it off road. I'm not worried about scratching the paint or the bumper and the
it's made for it.
Yeah. You're using it as intended, and if you hit a curb or you mess up on a line and drop into a hole, it's rugged enough. It just shakes it off. It doesn't care. I think that ruggedness and durability that's inherent to that platform, it's not as nice on the highway to drive as say a new Bronco or something like that. Which I would consult. It's funny, like my career in journalism for all these years, I can point to you things on like all you JL guys who have a garage door opener on your visor. That was me. On my JK, I bought one off a black Expedition interior and wired it to my cigarette lighter and put it in my A-pillar. One of the executives rode in my Jeep and was like, "What's that?" He said, "My garage door opener." "Well, aren't you worried about somebody opening your garage if the top and doors are off?" I'm like, "No, it's tied to the ignition." I'm like, "I don't know why you guys don't do it." Well, JL has it. Also, if you talk to Tony Carvalho, who recently just joined Steer Smarts, was at Best Top, but he was at Jeep for a long time. Off-Road Plus was mine too. So like that was a whole thing. So I can claim parts of that. So if you love those parts of your Jeep, I'm going to go ahead and claim those things. But
you've had so much influence on the industry, Sean. I mean, when you just left Motor Trend Group and Fourwheeler, I mean, you were running the entire truck group.
Yeah. So I had all the content for the truck and off-road side. So all, at one point I had diesel power and work truck and truck trend and truckin', mini truckin'. I had Four-Wheeler, Peterson 4 and off-road, JP. It was we were touching every part of the industry through all those different brands, and as it consolidated, it narrowed, and we weren't as able to to do as much fun stuff as we used to because we were only working with a few primary brands. But yeah, I've had the opportunity to work with General Motors, Nissan, Ford. I did a bunch of stuff with Bronco. But yeah, I think that brings back to the Bronco comment was, Jeep it's a Jeep. And people go, well, that's just an excuse. And you're like, yeah, but if somebody today came to you and asked Ford about this, because they had a lot of teething problems. Somebody came to you and said, Scott, I want to make a new car. And you're like, okay. And they're like, it's got to be four-wheel drive. Yeah, no problem. It's got to go down the freeway 80 miles an hour. Okay. It also has to go off-road. Okay, it has to have low range. Yeah, whatever. the doors need to come off. It needs to be a convertible. It would sound like a Homer car. And you're like, nobody would ever build that today, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a Jeep, it's a Bronco, but that's the flexibility of being able to do all those things. The Jeep is special, to
That's
have.
why they sell so many of them. They're so
180,000 a year.
They're
Something
so
like that.
good. They're so. You drive around Prescott. Like you can't go 3
Jeep
feet.
City.
You cannot go 3
I
feet.
have
Everybody moves here, trades in their Mercedes sedan,
and gets a Jeep.
buys a Jeep.
Well, it's like I've got a mid-size solid axle V8 vehicle.
Yeah.
Think of the last time you could get a mid-size solid axle V8 vehicle from the factory anywhere.
I know, it's amazing.
The 80s.
with twin turbos, maybe the G-Wagon.
yeah. They went, IFS.
Independent.
Oh yeah, they
on
do.
the new ones.
And it's better for it. But that chassis went back to 1979.
Yeah. For that platform and for that buyer, it's fine. It makes sense.
No,
But-
you're absolutely right. I mean, until like the Grenadier now.
Yeah.
I mean, which still isn't a V8, but
Yeah.
But just the fact that Jeeps exist, I think, is so cool.
And I actually think it's good that, when Hummer went away, I was actually worried for Jeep because I always think that when you exist in a vacuum, the scrutiny only goes with that one company.
Yeah.
So I think that Ford came back with Bronco was actually good for Jeep because I know for a fact that there's some stuff Jeep engineers have wanted to do, but because it was such a successful program, there's no competition. This company's like, we don't really need to, we're not going to spend the money on that.
Yeah.
Well, now they have to because they've got competition in the space. I think it's good for Ford.
It
I think
seems
it's
like
good-
a lot of people at Stellantis have had the handcuffs literally and figuratively taken off. Like I cannot wait for, JL 2.0. It's coming up soon, right? I mean, it has to be. They're on like clockwork, 10-year product cycle with a 5-year refresh.
Well, and until they realize that we're still selling above our business plan, so we can kick that back a few years. But the mid-cycle refresh is coming, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and these are important updates, and we're going to see more electrification, which some people it's going to work great for.
Well,
I think the 4xe is cool.
So, here's a perfect example of my driveway. My wife has a brand new Grand Cherokee 4xe, and I've got the 392. And
the 4xe is great.
And the use case is perfect. My wife, her commute's about 10 miles. She gets 25 miles of electric range. We plug it in at night. She went from filling up, every week to filling up every 3 weeks. And we plug it in and she goes, and then by maybe the end of the day, she might have 5 or 10 miles of gas. Or, if she has a long day, now she can plug in while she's somewhere EV only, right?
Yeah.
Plug in and it's a beautiful car. It has the same torque as my 392. It's a second faster than the Grand Cherokee 2-row V8. And they actually just dropped the V8, and now they have V6 and 4xe in the 2-row. Gorgeous car, screwed together. The interior's amazing on it. We've got a Summit.
So good.
So different than my 392, yet we're okay having that. So I had a 4xe, a Wrangler, for a few months. And it was actually, I actually pre-ran Overland Adventure, which was a four-wheeler event that we put on this past year, entirely in the 4xe. And it was kind of cool because what I didn't realize is the gas tank's smaller because of the batteries. And so it's only 18 gallons to 21 and a half, which I wasn't planning on because I drive a Wrangler every day. So I was expecting my range to be a certain amount. And I'm heading out to Goffs, and about 10 miles short, I run out of gas. Well, this is one thing that Jeep does that, to my knowledge, nobody else does, which makes the electrification brilliant for the enthusiast. They have 3 modes. One is hybrid, where it decides whatever the most efficient mode of transportation is. It has battery only, where it'll prioritize battery, and it has e-save, which charges the battery while you're driving and doesn't use it unless you're wide open throttle passing or whatever, and you override that. But in normal driving, won't use it. I typically would drive around in e-save mode because it would be nice to cruise in the neighborhood at night silently, or on the trail. There's places where electrification is a lot of fun.
That's my favorite.
So I
just
see
being quiet
it's
on the trail.
Like running out of gas. I'm 10 miles short of the gas station. I just went over. I hit the battery mode, and was on electric the rest of the way in. And it's like, whew. So it's like having an auxiliary tank if you use it right, which is kind of cool, right? And then off road again. It's the torque of it, and it's from my experience in the Ford Lightning, the Hummer, the Rivian, and the 4xe in electric mode, you see so much more wildlife and animals when you're on the trail, and it's weird. It's almost as if the tires on the ground remind them, or they think it's a hoof of an animal. Because we've had antelope and stuff, and they look and they don't care. They shrug you off. You come in an internal combustion engine, and they all scatter.
Yep.
So we've come in the middle of like this wildlife in those things. Coyotes walking alongside you in silent mode, just looking like, oh, look at that big ugly coyote right there or something, right? It's
been our experience.
Yeah,
it's so
just,
good.
There's a place for it, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah, like everybody just loves to hate on EVs. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I think it's because they're being forced on people, right? And I think if we were honest about EVs and it wasn't zero emissions, and it was, here's the things where it's better, here's the things where it's worse, here's your use case. There's
Consumer
a place for
choice.
it.
Consumer choice.
Exactly. It's a tapestry of technologies that'll take us in the future. They shouldn't be mandating one winner. Consumers should choose the winner, and I think that's the heartburn that a lot of people have with
and it's understandable. We do know that EVs are not emissions free.
Right.
It takes an enormous amount.
We're
of
offshoring
energy.
them to feel better about ourselves, right? And offshoring the waste, and most of, especially in the Southwest, most of our plants are natural gas anyway. And going back to the stove, it's like, hey, you can have all electricity, but you can't have natural gas. But the electricity comes from natural gas. So just don't look. Door number 2 doesn't exist
like
over here.
5 years
right?
ago, natural gas was the clean energy.
It's still the clean energy.
It actually is natural gas, the clean energy. Like
Well, we're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. If we changed our entire infrastructure from petroleum to natural gas, we could be almost completely independent. I mean, it's amazing how much reserves, and natural gas in North America is incredibly clean burning, and we don't leverage that. Could you imagine if all of a sudden, like, the politics of needing, the Middle East, it didn't exist anymore? You're like, no, we got our own stuff.
Yeah,
and then the world would stop and go, well, wait a minute, what does this mean, right? We can't fight wars with each other for oil anymore. I think most people would be fine with that.
They'll find something to improve their ratings.
We've got to have a reason to fight wars.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've had all these great vehicles. Which one was your favorite?
Oh, I mean, that's a loaded question. I've got a 1942 GPW. That was
perfect.
The very first 4x4 I ever drove on my uncle's ranch.
Oh, yeah.
And he called me a couple years ago, and he's like, hey, thinking about getting rid of that old flat fender, and my kids aren't interested in it. Man, I want to see it go to somebody, and I know you have some sentimental value, so it's up at the ranch. Come get it. Like, all right, see you next week. And so I've got that. It's in various states of being
so good,
fixed
man.
right now.
That's awesome.
So that thing's cool.
So cool.
And then for newer vehicles, obviously the 392. I had a TRX for a year, which was phenomenal. I drove that thing all over the desert. Didn't have any issues with it. You're going over stupid size stuff at 60 miles an hour, airing it out and hucking it over, landing sideways, and it just feels like a marshmallow. Like, it's just so much power. And it was funny how at the beginning of that loan, I'm like, oh my God, 702 horsepower. And at the end of the loan, I'm like, come on, give me more. Because you just calibrate to it. And even the 470 and the 392, it's the TRX chassis can handle. The Jeep is like at the bitter limit. So people are like, I'm thinking of a supercharger. I'm like, what's wrong with you, you maniac, right? I haven't spent as much time.
Could you imagine the torque?
Chassis
torque.
So this is a party trick. I've had my friends. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna remote start it. And we all stand out, and when it fires up, the whole body moves, just like an old muscle car. And so all the old guys are like, oh, it sounds great. Did you see that? The whole car moved when it started up. It reminds me of my Chevelle. I mean, it's stupid. That thing is phenomenal. But I also love my 20, even with the blower on it. I had 101 to 1 crawl ratio with it. It was everything AEV. That thing took me, I think when I sold it had 35,000 miles on it or something, and I guarantee you probably 15 to 20,000 miles were off-road. Because I always had another car, so every trip was driving somewhere and then wheeling it off-road for a week and then driving it home.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I never had an issue with it. It's just so capable, and I'm hoping for the same experience with the 392. And one of the good things about 392 is all the Jeeps have that stupid auxiliary battery, the little one that goes bad.
Yeah.
It leaves you stranded when you least expect it. No electronic start-stop in a 392, one battery.
Cool.
So you don't have to worry about your little battery, hosing you. Plus, the gross vehicle weight rating on a 392 XR is like 6,250. So from a tax write-off standpoint,
it's only
you can write it off.
80%. It's only 80% for the 2023 financial year. Not that I know anything about writing cars off.
I'll take that 80% because I've got 2 businesses that just got fired up, and I'll use every bit of it. So.
Yeah, that's right.
I just think the 392 is going to be an end-of-era car. And
Yeah, it's peak Jeep.
Yeah, I don't know if it will, from an enthusiast perspective, I don't know if it will get any more emotional.
Yeah.
Cars will always and always get better. I mean, in 5 years, we'll be sitting here and there'll be some crazy electric.
Yeah, but I don't want
BEV.
I don't want a steering wheelless pod to pull up outside and take me to my hotel or something.
No, what I'm saying is that there'll be another crazy fast Jeep, but this will be. This is a once.
Well,
in a
EV allows
lifetime.
that, right? EV allows that,
yeah.
but is it going to be solid axles and super capable? And it's a moment in time. Whether it's a Raptor R, whether it's a 392, whether it's a TRX, it's the end of an era. Now's the chance. If you've ever been on the fence about purchasing a V8 enthusiast vehicle, car or truck, or have,
it's going to stop soon.
This is it. I mean, you're in your last couple of years of being able to do that as electrification comes in. And to your point, there will be things that match the performance.
Yeah.
But I was with my friend Gail Banks, who owns Banks Tower.
I saw that.
And so I give him a ride in it, and we were just giggling the whole time. And he drives a Blackwing Cadillac CT6V, and it was, we were just talking about the old hot rodders. Like, there's nothing that's like a V8 at full tilt. There's just nothing out there. And that emotion, that visceral feel, where it's not just sound, but you can feel it in your bones.
You could die at any second.
Yeah. I mean, you're like, whoa, it's amazing, right? Having the world stretch out in front of you, but also having the soundtrack to go with it. And, we just, on the Truck Show podcast, we just had episode 3 with Gail on it. And there's one quote that he says, he's talking about V8s, and he goes, there's just nothing, I can't remember what his term was, if it was exciting or emotional, because there's nothing emotional about, and, but he's right. I've driven a lot of fast electric vehicles, and they're cool, and there's a place for them, but they're not emotional. It's a
different emotion.
It's a great toaster, right? Like, it'll go fast and it'll do everything you want.
But a lot of modern cars are still, they're just internal combustion toasters these days, right? Like, I'm not talking about the 392, but there's nothing special about a Pentastar V6, right? It's fine. It's there. It works. It's reliable. Okay, cool. And then you get into, commuter cars. Like I always say, in LA, most people in LA should be driving an electric car. Like, they're sitting in traffic half the time.
Yeah, no, it's the perfect use case for that sort of thing.
But I think where the argument with electric cars is steered wrong with the enthusiasts is that nobody's saying that you can't have a cool old car. Nobody's saying that you can't have a 392.
Yet. Slippery slope, my friend. Once they take your oven and your stove, they're taking anything.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible. I mean, although, even
Arizona exists. There's actually a lot of prominent car collectors that are moving to Arizona for that reason.
Well, you guys have the awesome historical plates here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think in Arizona people will ever try and take it away.
Vern Simons, who worked with us at Fourwheeler, has let's just say it's a Frankenstein Jeep that has a flat fender grill on it.
Oh, yeah, I've seen the tan one.
And it has a copper plate on it. And we were at a show at one sometime, I think, and he told me a story. Somebody walked up and said, "That's not a Willys. How'd you get that plate?" And Vern's response was, "What are you, a cop?"
Awesome. Yeah, you can put a license plate on anything in this state.
Pretty much.
Yeah, gotta love Arizona.
My Trials bike doesn't have a headlight or a seat, and it has a license.
License plate, everything.
Works for us.
No, it's been so cool to see all the projects that you've built through the years, and a lot of the reason why even Overland Journal exists is because of Fourwheeler. I mean, I've told this story before, but the first magazine I ever picked up was a camel trophy on the cover, and I think it was either Off-Road or Fourwheeler. It was one of them, and I just I was a 19-year-old kid, just completely wonderstruck by this publication, and then
a Land Rover Defender on logs crossing a V-notch waterfall canyon.
It's so good.
With some dude smoking a Camel, and you're like, not only does that look awesome, but that dude looks cool.
Exactly. And I grew up in Southern California too, but I remember the feeling when I that all came full circle, and I got a hold of Phil Howell. And the guy actually replied to my email. And I think the reason why he replied to my email, I sent him a complete package. I sent him the story, copy edited, all of the images with
Us
an image
editors
key,
love that stuff
with an
clean.
image key.
Yep.
It was ready to go.
Yep.
And he responded and he said, this is the first time I've ever got, and the only thing he told me, he says he's some of the words too many syllables, knock that back a little bit. But other than that, it was my chance to actually be in Fourwheeler and off road in those magazines. And with the announcement of Fourwheeler closing, I think that it's a loss for the industry.
60 years. I mean, you think about, we were really the original overlanding magazine.
Yeah, sure.
Literally the very first issue, I think the tagline was the magazine for backcountry adventure or something like that.
Perfect.
And that was in February of 1962. And we were showing people camping out of their Jeeps and their Toyota Land Cruisers and things like that. And you flash forward to the 80s, and you've got Turtle Expedition with Gary and Monica.
Yeah.
And I mean, that Turtle Expedition 1 through 5, 6, whatever it ended up being, was prolific for a lot of people, and recognizing that you could have this lifestyle of living out of this vehicle and traveling the world and meeting people in a way that you only thought a cruise ship or an airplane could take you to. And now you're going to places that most people would never see through their eyes. And then on to the original, or the current, overland movement, which I would say probably started in about 2007, 2008, earnestly in the U.S. ARB bringing over the Simpson rooftop tent was kind of one of the things that launched that. Bull bars. Oh, I guess something Australians have, right? And I remember we built for SEMA 2010 Forerunner, the new body style, at Fourwheeler, wrapped with Fourwheeler for SEMA in 2010 in the Toyota booth with full ARB everything on it. And at that point, nobody had, so all these people who think they're doing new things with Forerunners, I'm like, I'm sorry to tell you, 2009, 2010, I was already on that boat.
And it was still the same car.
And it's still the same vehicle.
It is still the same.
Now, you guys are using more gold on your wheels now than you did back then, and extra ladders and lights, but...
Yeah, think about it. Same drivetrain.
Same drivetrain.
Transmission.
I think the transmission is it it 5-speed or
It's still
6?
a 5-speed.
Still 5-speed.
It's still a 5-speed. It's unbelievable. And they're still worth so much money. It's
I know.
It's just unreal.
You know what's funny is I have
Well, they work.
a buddy of mine who has
They do work.
his son turned 16, and he's like, I'm looking for a Tacoma, and the pricing is insane. And I'm like, don't get a Tacoma because you're gonna overpay. Go look for a Frontier Pro 4X.
Yeah, totally.
Super underrated, fully boxed frame, rear disc brakes, 4-liter V6 with more torque on it, super reliable, super simple vehicle.
They're awesome.
Rear locker on a Pro 4X, 32-inch tires, Dana, 44 rear axle. So he starts looking at those. He goes, these are almost as expensive as Tacomas. I go, really? Because what happened was they didn't build as many of them, and everybody's figuring out in the secondary market, oh my God, that was a great truck that I never even paid attention to, but it's perfect to get into this or for my kid or whatever. So we found one, and he's been wheeling the snot out of it. And it's funny, there's a Facebook group about wheeling the San Juans, and somebody said, hey, I just got this Frontier. I don't really know enough about it. Could I do all the trails? And I'm thinking, oh, here's going to be the bash fest. It was amazing. Everybody's like, that was my first truck. Put a set of rock rails on it. Don't do anything else. Have fun. You can do anything out here and that. And it was awesome to see this community that kind of got their start, or guys showing off their Frontiers. And it's a shame that platform has so much going for it, and the aftermarket has largely ignored it.
Yeah. And that's really the only thing that's hurting it, I think.
Because from a capability standpoint, I mean, you look, it's the F-Alpha architecture, and it has a deep drawn frame rail, which it shares with the Titan half ton. And if you look at a Toyota, one of the things that always bugged me about the Toyotas was the frame rails aren't very tall, and so the transfer case hangs low and has that skid plate that hangs down.
Yeah.
Look at a Frontier. It's almost totally flat. Nothing hangs below the bottom of the frame rail because they have these really deep drawn frame rails, which also makes the truck really strong and rugged. And so I always tell people, I'm like, Toyota is living off their reputation. It's a great truck, don't get me wrong. They've earned it. But it's not always the best choice. At least go look at a Frontier.
Go drive it.
And,
People always say, oh, I wish they sold the Hilux here.
Yeah.
Well, Nissan sells their equivalent of it. It's called a Navara elsewhere. I know there's a few little changes and things like that, but it's here.
Yeah, I was just so surprised that they didn't bring the 5-link from the Navara.
I know. When you and I were in Morocco driving that AT32,
it was so good.
It was so good.
So good.
I'm looking at them, and it's like, guys, this
is
you would.
it.
And now, Ranger Raptor is going to have, it sounds like, going to have.
And the next Tacoma will have 5-link, and the Tundra has 5-link.
And they already have the geometry figured out. I'm like,
That is my beef with the Frontier, is that I drove the new Navara in 2013 when I was running a magazine in Australia.
Yeah.
And it's a much better vehicle than the one that they're selling now.
Well, the one that just got redesigned, I think, is they nailed it on the styling.
Looks great.
It looks fantastic.
The nice thing is that the chassis is basically the same. All the hard points are the same. All that is the previous truck, which means that all the accessories, like suspension and stuff, is a direct bolt-on, and you can still do the Titan swap, where you do the Titan V8 and front end on the current truck. Just for anybody who wants to get a little wild out there, but all that's available. Like that stuff all still works. So, but the truck it's a great truck. It's completely underrated. I happen to like them a lot. So my advice for somebody looking for something midsize, at least go drive one, and you might be surprised. You might find out like, oh, this is.
I thought the ride quality was great.
Yeah.
The first gear is better.
Yep.
It's got a couple other extra.
A little more
cogs.
payload.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, it's pretty good. So. Speaking of the Morocco trip, you've done a bunch of international trips in your time too. Were you on that infamous 2007 Wrangler launch?
Yes, the one in Africa in
Don't they do in Vic Falls or something?
Zambia.
Yeah.
Zambia. Yeah.
I heard that was one of the most challenging.
There was two
media
waves.
events.
Yeah, they actually. And when you said the infamous, I thought you were going to say the Iceland trip where everybody almost died. That was John Stewart got stuck on that one. That was a really bad trip that went really sideways back in the day. But no, the JK Africa.
We got to hear
trip,
about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know all the stories, so I'd probably be making stuff up. But you got to get John on the horn. Yeah. But yeah, so the Africa trip was amazing. They actually brought all those vehicles. My understanding was through South Africa and drove them up to Zambia.
Yeah.
They left them all there at the end of the media drive. Every vehicle they brought is still sitting in Africa. I think they just handed the keys to like a chief of a village and was like, "Here you go," you know.
Have fun with that.
It was one of the most magical, one of the most well-run, one of the most special. I still have a picture on my wall of all of us landing at the dirt strip, Mafui, I think it was, with a Zambian, bill in it. It was the whole trip was funny. There's two waves. I believe I was on wave 2, but I can't really remember. The whole adventure of that trip started at LAX. We took United to London and London to Nairobi. And we get on the plane, and Rick Payway, I'm sure you probably had Rick on the show. Or
Not yet, but we need to.
You know
right
Rick.
here in Arizona.
He's down in Wickenburg.
Yeah,
now.
that's right.
Yeah, you should get him on. He'll have way more stories. But he's standing there, and we're all in business class, right? Like, this is an international trip. The journalists are going to get taken care of. And we're like, yep, this is going to be great. And Rick gets his name called to the podium. And we're like, Rick got his name called. What's going on over there? And Rick walks on the airplane. So finally comes time to board business class. Rick's in first class, and we're all in business. He's like smiling and stuff. They're holding the plane door, and here comes the passenger that Rick bumped back to business class. It's Paris Hilton flying to London. So she sat next to us, which was super weird. And I remember her reading Us Weekly with her girlfriend, like, oh my God, oh, that's so hot. Like her tagline in person. It was
That was
the weirdest.
Like peak Paris Hilton.
Oh yeah, it was peak Paris Hilton for sure. And I remember, like, she has really pretty skin and huge feet. Those are the two things I remember. And it was the funniest thing. So, like, that's how that trip started. And I remember in Nairobi, you get off the plane in Nairobi, and there's no jet bridge. It's all stairs. And we were on a 777, which is obviously a massive plane. And the ozone just hits you in the face, and your eyes start watering, and all the pollution. Like, oh my God, where am I? Where have you taken me? And we were at this British hotel the first night, had this amazing food and everything. And the next day we go back to the airport. We take a charter and DC-9 to a small airport. Went right by Mount Kilimanjaro.
Awesome.
And landed. Switched planes to a Cessna Caravan, had to go to a dirt runway. They couldn't find the runway. We were circling in the air, and I'll never forget, I was sitting in the very back row, and a Caravan's like 14 people.
That's a cool plane.
They are cool planes. They're super rugged. But I'm thinking, not only am I the last one to die, I get to watch everybody crush me as the sucker goes down, right? I'm like, I can't find the field. And you're going, well, don't run out of gas, please. We land there, and there's all these Jeep executives and PR people, and all the Jeeps are all lined up on the side of the runway. It was really special. And
wasn't Duncan Barber the guy who put that all together?
Yeah. And,
He talked about that.
Duncan was great. And then Robin, can't think of his last name, was a friend of Duncan. He just passed away not too many years ago of cancer, I think, because I caught up with Duncan, and I had asked about, I think it was Robin, and we went on all these great trails. You're talking about like elephant trails, not Jeep trails, elephant trails. I remember the elephant grass was so high on this hill, and the slope was so steep that the rear of the Jeep was sliding sideways as we were side sloping this thing on the elephant grass, and everybody's jumping out and walking next to the Jeep with their hand kind of holding it, and you're looking downhill, and there's all these, like, Africa will kill you 50 different ways.
It will.
Like the tsetse flies, like you hit them and they shake it off and they look at you and they bite you again, and there's lions. Every rock is super hard. Every tree is as hard as a rock. The baobab tree is going to drop like the fruit on your head, or there's going to be a giant, African bee nest that's going to kill you. The villagers that we saw, I brought my first digital camera because we just swapped over to Canon 10Ds. And so I would take pictures of these kids, and we brought them like pencils and Smarties candies. And I would show them their picture, and they just went wild. They had never seen anything like that. We'd be driving through these villages, and these trucks that were going into the city had 100 people on them. And they would put these boards on the side and bang nails up so that people's feet couldn't go on the boards to hang off the truck, and they figured out a way to hang off of it anyway. And they're all top heavy, and the whole, just, I will tell you, I never felt unsafe in Africa. It was, the people there are amazing.
Yeah, they're amazing.
100%.
You couldn't find more animals than the San Diego Wild Animal Park. I mean, we had these huts that had like an open shower with like a half wall. Monkeys would come down and grab your soap while you're taking a shower. I had a hippopotamus hit my door trying to break in the middle of the night.
That's
I'm like,
terrifying.
I don't want a hippo in here, I got pictures of the
I think
hippo.
hippos kill more people in
Yeah.
Africa.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, they flip boats. We had to go across this river, and it could only hold, I think, 2 Jeeps at a time, and there was this cable. And these guys think of it as like it's shaped like a guitar or a club, but it was like a question mark, and they would row the boat by clipping on this cable and pulling, just 2 dudes, and they're pulling a Jeep across this river on this guide wire. And so they're like, oh, this is going to take a lot of time. Do you want to go out in the boat and get photos? And it's a canoe or a like little metal canoe that has a motor on the back. And they're like, I'll get you close to the hippo so you can take photos. Because what they do is they'll knock the boat over and then attack you in the water. And I'm like, all right, is it safe? He goes, well, as soon as they go underwater, be ready because we have to move. So he gets me up to the hippos. I get these pictures, and it looks like the Jungle Cruise, right? And all of a sudden they disappear. He's like, you're trying to not fall out of the back of the boat. We had a camp. King cobras are like slithering through camp. I remember Douglas McCullough, who was the editorial director of Fourwheeler at the time, stepped out of his tent in the middle of the night to take a leak and fell down a 5-foot berm where all the crocodiles had been earlier in the day.
Oh, no.
I mean, there's a wildfire. We were driving through a wildfire on our trip. One of the guys, Todd Goyer from Jeep, and Colin McBain were in a 2-door Jeep and rolled it. And the airbags went off, the inside impact. And so they were shaken up. Jeep was okay, but the top was messed up and the windshield frame. So we drove it the rest of the week with no doors, no top, and the windshield folded
Which
down.
is perfect.
And you're just you're as dirty as, it looks like you worked in a coal mine. And like me and Pei, we were fighting over driving that thing. Because they're like, oh, screw the other ones. This is a 2-door and now open top Jeep with dents all over it. This thing's awesome. That trip, I remember I started my watch when we left Zambia. And when I landed at LAX, it was 36 hours later because I was curious how long the total time to get home was.
Yeah, sure.
And when we went through customs in Nairobi, they asked me if my camera was real. And so I just took a picture to show them, and I got swarmed by security because you're not allowed to take pictures of government officials. I'm like, no, I'm just showing you it works. And so that almost became a big thing. I mean, the whole trip, everything about it, but just the food, the people, the experience. I went to the New Zealand launch in 2017.
Yeah, that was JL,
for JL.
right? Yeah.
And the guys who put that on, a couple of them had been on the Africa trip. We were having dinner one night, and they're like, tell us the truth. You're one of the only people here who's been on both. Which one's your favorite? And I'm like, Africa. And they're like, what? I'm like, New Zealand was incredible. It's top 5 of media trips of all time. Africa will probably... There was a moment in time where a company was willing to spend $1 million to have 10 journalists fly across the country to have an experience in their new vehicle. They knew that JK had to be revolutionary, and they had to get everybody at every major publication there. The landscape of publications is different now. The people who are in the know or who are the trusted journalists are in different places now. I don't know that you'll ever quite have a trip like that. Well, it was that special.
Defender.
Yeah, Defender in Namibia was pretty good.
Yeah, but that's not on the same level as that.
I mean, we were doing.
We landed on a dirt run. We did all this.
I remember having to.
Of course, Duncan was there
to fake land once to get the goats off of the runway.
Yeah, well, that happens. Yeah. Well, and I've got photos There were some sketchy stuff that we did in the Jeep. I mean, obviously driving up wood, kind of like Camel Trophy, we had to drive over these wood bridges that were maybe 30 feet over a ravine that were laid out, and you only had inches on either side of the wheel. Your wheel placement had to be perfect. And we had to cross this really fast-moving river, and my rear end started washing away, and I dropped off the stone road that was underwater and had to, like, gun it with water going over the hood. Just showing you like how high the water fording is on those. They're like, oh no, you're gonna get washed away. I mean, we did some serious stuff. There was one particular.
That's what I heard. It was just the most difficult.
Yeah, there was nothing light. You would not take your average journalist and say drive this. They would fear for their lives. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. There was one place where we dropped into this unbelievable like granite river canyon, and it was probably a 45-foot drop. It was exactly the width of the Jeep. And as you know, JKs were a lot wider than TJs, so we weren't used to the width at that point. You were scrubbing your sidewalls, and as you dropped on the front, your rear lifted, and there was a complete drop 40 feet to your right. So if you would have stabbed the brakes and done a momentum shift, you would have rolled and crushed yourself in this I mean, this was one of the things where you go, these guys are the real deal. There's a lot of manufacturers who you watch their commercials, and as the Jeep executives will say now, they're trying to be Jeep, right? You have Kias on, going up Hell's Revenge. By the way, sway bar was disconnected, different tires, there wasn't stock, right? But RAV4s are out there, Subaru Wilderness, and they're good vehicles in their own right, but they're not this. And it just showed that these engineers and this vehicle was the real deal. And
it was special, man.
It was special.
Yeah,
it was
for
special.
Sure. Well, Sean, if someone's getting new into overlanding and they like to do more challenging terrain, what would be a couple pieces of advice that you would give them for driving off-road? What would be your first 5 things that you would tell somebody to pay attention to when they want to do a better job or protect their vehicle in technical terrain?
Take your time. It's not a race. I think people rush themselves through, or they get nervous because somebody's watching them. If somebody's spotting you, take one person's advice and tell the rest to go away. One of my pet peeves is somebody who's spotting and another guy jumps in and thinks it's like, and I always tell the driver, you decide who you want. Like, I'm not going to kick these guys out, but you can only have one, and don't be afraid of the winch. So many people think it's like shameful to grab your winch cable, and they'll have this like, $2,500 winch setup on their $2,000 bumper, and they'll be afraid to grab it because what will people say? No, that's why you have it. Grab the winch.
Pride for people to not use them.
Yeah, and you don't be prideful and air down. Like the number one thing you could do to your vehicle to make it more capable off road is airing down.
100%.
Everybody thinks, and bead locks are. Nobody overlanding needs bead locks. You don't need it. They're dangerous. You have to torque them. You can get injured if you do it improperly. If you're overlanding and have a load, there's no reason to ever be below 15 or 14 PSI. And at that PSI with the weight you're carrying, you're not cutting the wheel enough to pull a bead anyway. Don't run bead locks. Like on my AEV wheels, I have it in protection ring mode because I can replace the ring. It doesn't scratch up my wheel. That makes sense. The other thing I would say is a stock vehicle is incredibly capable. Learn your stock vehicle and get comfortable with it first. Don't feel like you have to have all the upgrades everybody else does, because if you don't understand stock, you're not going to understand modified. It's kind of like if you haven't had a bad day, you can never really understand what a good day looks like, right?
Sure.
I think too many people go and make a Frankenstein vehicle of all these great brands that never were designed to work together. So do simple mods at a time. Figure out if they work together. Don't do a whole, I'm going to go drop $50,000 the day I buy it and, have it completely done with all these different parts. Unless it's maybe like an AEV, which it has been holistically designed for all the parts to work together.
Sure.
But too many people rush out and they build their vehicle and then they're not happy about it, or they get death wobble, or they get an issue, and it's like, did that issue exist before it was stock? Well, I don't know, because I never drove it stock. And so you don't really have a baseline to start from. And I think ego gets a lot in the ways of people. I think that's when mistakes are made. There's no shame in, Chris Collard is one of those guys who always has a good quote, and he said it best. Good roads bring bad people, bad roads bring good people. Be respectful of the people you run across on the trail, because you're not calling AAA. You may be calling that guy to come back and save you.
You may need them.
Yeah. I mean, I recently, on Fourwheeler of the Year this year, we get up the backside of Big Bear in California. We just had a ice storm. And about 5 miles of the trail with a sheer drop on the north side of the mountain facing Johnson Valley is a sheet of ice. And we've got all stock vehicles. And there's a girl who's absolutely petrified, who's been stuck up there for 2.5 hours because she felt her Jeep slip and she just parked it. And we get to her and we're like, hey, are you okay? She's like, no, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm scared. I'm going to, like heart stopping, can't breathe, full on panic attack.
Yeah.
And I said, okay.
It would be terrifying.
And it was enough ice where I could barely walk next to the vehicle to get up to her. So we talked for a while, kind of earned her trust. And I said, would you like one of us to drive it? And she goes, yeah, could you? And I said, well, or I'll walk with you and you drive it. And I said, I'm going to even walk on the passenger side. So if you go down the hill, I go with you. Because that's how I know you're not, I'm going to show you that I trust that we're not going to go down the hill. I'm going to be between you and the fall. Okay. And so we worked on it for about 20 minutes, like literally inches at a time. So, okay, it's not going to do anything. Oh, it just slipped. No, it fell into a hole. It's icy. It's fine. By the end of that, she was driving and talking to me. She was going, 10 miles an hour. I hop in with her. She had some friends that met her. The rest of the day, all she did was drive on ice, and I got her Instagram, and we've become friends. And she texted me, and she said, that moment of your patience walking me through, all the rest of the day, I had so much confidence. All I did was drive on the ice all day long, and I had a blast. Yeah, and that goes to like taking care of people and not letting the ego get in the way. And I didn't go, what the hell are you doing up here? You don't belong here. These aren't the right tires for ice. So you've never done ice before.
People get so cagey.
What? Yeah. Right. And it's like, what do you need? What do you need to feel comfortable? Let's get you down the road. You've got a great built vehicle. You can do it. This is mental. Let's walk you through it. And I've seen so many people be dismissive of other wheelers. Oh, I don't like their vehicle. I don't like their setup, or I don't like whatever. Or somebody driving being like, I don't want to pull my winch because they're going to think less of me. It has nothing to do with anything.
They're the same people who don't like beginners, but they were.
Yeah, but they were.
They
are
all
beginners. Yeah, but they are beginners. Yeah, they never stop learning.
And of course. They started a year before that person.
The other thing I would say, I enjoy spotting people. Always say passenger and driver.
That's right.
Never say right and left, because you're right and left, and that's how people have accidents. And you see, the qualified captain equivalent of a dude, ass over tea kettle coming down from a bad spot. Say driver or passenger. Use hand gestures. I always keep for most people who don't have a ham license, GMRS with a 10-year family license is kind of the best thing going. It's really great plug and play consumer out of the box. Midland makes some great radios.
They make great radios.
They replace the CB. You don't need to have the technical acumen of a ham radio. They're perfect for the next generation of consumers wheeling. What I like about them is you can still have the handheld ones. So I have my hard mount Midland, and I also have a Midland X-Talker hanging off my grab bar. So if I hop out and everybody on the trail's on it, I take my radio with me so I can spot them and they can hear me.
Yeah.
So always grab, if you got a GMRS, grab the little walkie-talkies, because they can become invaluable if you've got to walk away from the group or you've got to spot somebody, and a lot easier than yelling at somebody with the engine or whatever, and somebody's not embarrassed because you're like, no, idiot, drivers, right? No, you're on the radio. Okay, a little bit more.
Yeah.
And you can be a little bit more calming than it is if you're trying to talk over, exhaust or engine sounds or a crowd gathered, things like that.
Yeah, totally. What other questions you got for Sean?
I want to know about your new magazine.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. So I recently left Motor Trend.
I'll wipe this for you.
So I recently left Motor Trend, and I've got a lot going on. I'm never somebody that does anything halfway. So I don't know what the future is going to hold. So I'm kind of hedging my bets, and I got involved in a lot of things. So I took over our podcast, the Truck Show Podcast. We've been doing that for 5 years.
Which is a great podcast, by the way.
It's great if you're into trucks and busting with your buddies and having a good time, and we've got great interviews, and we just have fun with it. So I own that now, which is huge. And then I started a new company called Use for Adventure, and that's sort of like freelance marketing, consulting, and adventure stuff. And then the third project I'm involved in is this new magazine here, which is called OVR. So it's Outdoor Vehicle Recreation. Fourwheeler, unfortunately, was canceled, and so the print magazine's not around anymore. And a friend of mine who was a Motor Trend alumni who started Recoil, this is his baby. He's been trying to get me over here for 2 years. And my leaving Motor Trend and Fourwheeler being canceled coincided with the launch of it. And they gave me an opportunity to buy in as a minority partner in the magazine. And it fits the perfect space. We were talking earlier. I think it's sort of, not as aspirational as Overland Journal is, but a little bit more technical and a little broader than maybe Tread. It's kind of that middle ground that I think Fourwheeler lived in really well.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And it's OVR hints at overlanding, but it's about wheeling. It's about gear. There's not a lot of magazines. Maybe you guys, and I can't really think of any others. There's not a lot of people who do gear review from the vehicle-based exploration perspective. You go to Gear Lab or Outdoor or some of those, it's always like, we really love this mattress, but we couldn't take it with us because it was too heavy for a backpack or didn't stow. And I'm like, that's exactly the mattress I want for my rooftop tent or my shift pod or something, right?
Sure.
So, I think, it'll be great to be able to give those kinds of advice and gear review from the backcountry traveler vehicle-based exploration. Plan on doing destinations, trail rides, tech, maybe not as hardcore as Fourwheeler was, but you'll still get a lot of that. It's an oversized package, just like Recoil Magazine was. It's the same team that did the design for this and the design for that.
It looks great.
I'm excited. I think it's going to be really cool. It's sort of a dream come true for me. I worked for somebody else my entire life. I worked for the same people for almost 20 years. To have the opportunity to be an entrepreneur and get on the ground floor of something that I really believe in, the space, to still be able to start a company helping other companies in the space, and then to maintain ownership or to take over ownership of the podcast I started 5 years ago. The future's bright. It's super exciting, and I kind of am breathing, drinking through a fire hose right now. A lot of spaghetti on the wall. We'll see what sticks, but there's the world is pretty exciting and lots of options. So
we're super proud of you, Sean. I mean, I've known you for a long time. I've always been so impressed with your attitude. You've always had a positive attitude, and you've done a good job of maintaining not only professional friendships but a great reputation in the industry, and that's going to serve you really well as you go on to these new things. And it's just been so fun to have you on our podcast.
Well, I appreciate the invite and being able to make it happen. Like I said, I think the key to my success was when I started in the magazine world. I wanted to be in the off-road space. I realized that everybody wanted to drive a Ferrari or Lamborghini, and they ended up driving minivans. And you have this entire room full of minivan experts. I'm like, that's boring. Forget the exotics. I want to go drive off-road vehicles. And when I came up with, you could count on one hand the number of people that were well-versed OE trucks and aftermarket. It was maybe Allison Harwood, Mark Williams, John Stewart, maybe Rick Payway to an extent. And I just realized, like, putting myself in that company where I could go on both sides of the OE and aftermarket fence and really follow my passions. And, I've always been somebody who values the relationships with people. And, people are like, are you mad about Motor Trend? I'm like, no. They gave me a tremendous opportunity. I had an amazing 20 years. I put a post out and I said, Johnny Hunkins had said it best. He said, we have the best job in the world one day at a time. Because we all know that the magazine world's been volatile. I had 7 ownership changes in the 20 years I was there.
Yeah.
I had a lot of those one days strung together. I was very fortunate, very blessed to be able to have that lifestyle and to experience those things. I've been wheeling on 4 continents. I know I haven't been to Antarctica like you have. You're one of 2 people I know with the Antarctica passport stamp, which is super awesome. But I got to wheel on 4 continents. I've gotten to wheel in Africa and Australia and New Zealand and the Sahara sand dunes when we were out there with Nissan.
Yeah, that was so good.
Europe, with Land Rover, Canada. I've raced in the Baja 1000. We won with Josh Hall. I got to know people like Gail Banks and Rod Hall before he passed away, and all these greats of the industry. The Jay Leno's of the world, and just to have those experiences. I've lived 5 lifetimes and have gotten the access that people dream about. No, I'm not bitter at all. I'm excited and
you're just getting started.
And I'm just getting started now because I get to go out on my own.
You're a young guy still. You got it all ahead.
I don't know. Nobody tells you when you hit 45 that there's a lot of noises and things that hurt. And I'm like, what is this, right? My oldest daughter's 15. She'll be 16 this year. And my youngest is 5, and I think with my oldest kid, I was like the young, cool, energetic dad, and with the little one, I'm like the old, tired. Wow, where'd all my energy go, Dad? Right? But yeah, no, I love the space. I love the people. To see what you've done with this magazine and company. I mean, how many years has it been? 15?
Oh, it's going to be 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
In February since we started.
That's crazy.
West. Yeah,
that's crazy. I mean, just to see the growth that you guys have done, and people come and go out of these industries. You know who the real deals are and the people that stay. And I think this industry is a lot more special than other ones because of the closeness of the community. It's a small world out here.
It is.
It's funny, you're a 5-hour drive from me, but I may not see you until we're in Europe or Africa.
Totally,
right? I mean, it's
totally.
it's crazy.
Good.
You'll be at some media thing, and you flew 12 hours to get there. You're like, I could have just driven to see you. Right? It's special. We're lucky to be a part of it, and I appreciate your kind words and supporting me. And
oh man, it's
amazing.
awesome. No, it's been so impressive what you've done. Any other questions, Matt?
Want to have a beer?
Yeah, I could go for a beer right now. Hold on, let me check with HR. Yeah, we're good.
Sean, thanks so much for being on the podcast. And we thank you all for listening. And we'll talk to you next time.